Hello and welcome to the Western Traditions Podcast, a podcast about Western history. The story of our Western traditions is long. Where and when they began is debatable. Some people think that Western history begins with classical Greece. Around 500 years before the birth of Christ, the Greeks fought against the Persians in the great battles of Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Mycale. Many scholars see the Greek victories in these battles as the crucial moments in which the West was truly distinguished from the East. Others mark the birth of Western thought in Plato's dialogues. These philosophical essays were published a century after those great battles against the Persians. They demonstrated, among other things, the independence of Western thinking. These developments in classical Greece, the battles for independence and the rise of philosophical thought, were then inherited by the Romans centuries later and eventually passed on down to us. But ancient Egypt was also quite important for the classical Greeks and the Romans. Herodotus was the Greek author of the oldest history text in the world. He reports that the Egyptian priests told him that they possessed the most ancient civilization in the world, and later historians also believed this to be true for many centuries. Greek literature and myth does show that ancient Egypt greatly influenced Greek culture, so you could say that Western history begins with ancient Egypt. In fact, right up until the 19th century, actually, this was an accepted viewpoint. History instruction in the West often began with Egypt. In the 19th century, though, archaeologists discovered the ruins of another civilization that had existed before the pharaohs came to rule over the Nile River in Egypt. The cities of Sumer, scattered along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia, were founded at least 1,000 years before any kingdom existed in Egypt. And in the ruins, archaeologists discovered clay tablets marked with a strange form of writing that used lines and shapes that were completely indecipherable at first. This kind of writing is known as cuneiform. The story about how those tablets were decoded will be related in a future episode. But once the cuneiform was deciphered, scholars realized that most of the tablets contained routine information about commercial and political issues important to the cities of Sumer. However, there were some cuneiform tablets that told stories about the gods of the Sumerians, about the creation of the world, and about a great king of the Sumerians named Gilgamesh. Now, once we thought that the Iliad and the Odyssey were the earliest epic poems. They are both famous Greek stories allegedly authored by the poet Homer. Now, though, this Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh has been established as the first known example of an epic poem, in which the travails and triumphs of gods and men are recorded. Additionally, this epic of Gilgamesh includes a story about a great flood that was similar to the story of Noah in the Bible. So similar was the story, in fact, that it is hard not to consider this ancient tale to be part of our Western traditions. But the roots of our Western traditions go even deeper into the past than the ancient cities of Mesopotamia. Because the Bible is also a part of our Western traditions. The Christian Bible, Old and New Testaments, has always been one of the great books of the Western world. For many centuries, a young person's academic instruction always included the history of ancient Egypt, Greece and Rome, as well as passages from the Bible. In fact, you could say that the Bible and Christianity are core elements of Western culture. While this may seem obvious, it is also strange on some level. As we progress through these podcasts, you will see that the stories in the Bible are quite old, and a few of them are probably even older than Egypt. The Bible is essentially a product of an Eastern religion. The Hebrews that composed and preserved the text of the Bible came originally from the Mesopotamian basin. Like the stories in the Epic of Gilgamesh and other Babylonian documents, biblical stories are based on the cultural and religious ideas of the ancient Near East. But we associate the West with Europe. We assume a European foundation or origin for Western ideas, yet perhaps the most important Western ideas are found in the Bible. And the Bible has nothing to do with Europe. It rarely even mentions things European, outside of the rare remark it makes here and there about people living in far-off lands. For example, in the story of Jonah, the prophet who was swallowed by a whale, the writer makes mention of the city of Tarshish, This city was most likely in ancient Spain. However, these occasional remarks about Europe are about as far as the Bible goes in relating to European matters. The Bible does not even present to us a cultural milieu anything like that found in Greek mythology, which is another core element of our Western culture. When the Romans encountered the Greeks, even though their religious outlook was markedly different, they were easily able to incorporate Greek themes into their spirituality. This was due to their sharing a common Indo-European linguistic and cultural patrimony. But the Hebrew writers of the biblical text were not Indo-European speakers. They were Semites from Mesopotamia. Yet from them we have received in the West our guiding religion, Christianity, and the themes which have moved nations to both war and peace for thousands of years. This ancient text, the Bible, sustains and interacts with the entirety of our Western traditions. It is true that the ancient Greeks and Romans knew virtually nothing about Hebrew culture or religion, but later Western writers, such as Dante, author of the medieval classic The Divine Comedy, successfully intertwined Greek mythology with the stories of the Old and New Testaments. Works like Dante's and those of many other Western authors, such as Shakespeare, demonstrate just how vital the tales of the Greek and the Roman gods remained during the Middle Ages and after. Now, this entanglement of earlier pagan traditions with Christian scripture in the great books of the Western world is undeniable. One cannot understand a Shakespearean play without being familiar with the Bible, and simultaneously one cannot understand a Shakespearean play without having a decent knowledge of Greek or Roman mythology. Christian men of learning in the West also relied for many centuries on the scientific and mathematical knowledge passed down to them by the pagan Greeks and Romans. But the most famous men of science, art, and philosophy, up until the last century or so, were all steeped in religious knowledge as well. For example, Isaac Newton, renowned scientist, mathematician, and hero to many a modern atheist, was a devout Christian who wrote more books about theology than he did about math or science. Gregor Mendel, the father of the science of genetics, was an Augustinian monk. And the man who developed the Big Bang Theory in the early 20th century was a Catholic priest from Belgium named George Lemaitre. It is clear then that the roots of our Western traditions are quite deep and quite widespread. They encompass and somehow intertwine the ancient cultural heritages of the ancient Near East, the mythologies and philosophies of the Greeks and the Romans, and the scientific discoveries of both medieval and modern Europeans. Before you, I spread out a map. Its edges are tattered. Some portions are yellowed with time. Loving hands have gently unrolled this map. They have pressed the corners flat to see the extreme regions depicted. Meandering lines trace the geographic frontiers and the coastlines of the Near East, of Europe, and of the Americas. There are no political borders on this map. It is not a map of a specific time period, though certain cities of noteworthy age or significance dot the blank space between rivers, mountains, and ocean shores. Jericho, Babylon, Jerusalem, Athens, Rome, Paris, Madrid, London, Washington. See this geography laid out before us. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates wind their way between the ancient cities of ancient Sumer before uniting at the shores of the Persian Gulf. Buried somewhere here, according to the ancients, is the Garden of Eden. The Nile River courses steadily north from the mountains of East Africa, passing the ancient pyramids of Egypt, their locations noted on your map with simple inverted triangles that do no justice to their size or the power of their presence. Finally, this great river empties into the eastern Mediterranean. The island of Crete sits amid the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. The lost kingdom here was recipient of knowledge from Egypt, but also from other sources on the shores of that wine-dark sea. Here, the genesis of Greek culture took place. Lost Mycenae, buried in the soil of ancient Greece, gives us the tale of the Trojan War and the bloodline of mighty Agamemnon. Not far away, Sparta and Athens endure today, just as their soldiers endured 25 centuries ago against the Persian army and navy, sparking the fire that would blaze forth from this seemingly insignificant peninsula and warm the hearts and minds of 100 generations in Europe and elsewhere. The flame of this fire, the spirit of the men of the West, burns in the stubborn desire for independence among the Greek city-states, in the writings of Herodotus and Sophocles, in the philosophy of Socrates, and along the blade of the sword of Alexander the Great. This fire will burn also in the hearths of Roman homes, from which sturdy, valiant men will go forth to conquer the known world and unite its people under an umbrella latticed with roads and laws. As Rome passes into history, the Church will rise amid its ruins and sustain its legacy through the Middle Ages in scattered castles and burgeoning towns that Charlemagne will unite both by the power of the sword and of faith. Those towns will become the powerful cities of the early modern period, where men of genius will be born and produce new scientific knowledge that will challenge the preconceptions of ages past. Columbus and others will carry this fire thousands of miles overseas to the New World in ships made by hand from mere lumber. And the fire will also burn north to bring dominion to London, which will become a nexus for power and wealth as the years pass and approach the present. Finally, the British Empire will fade, and the locus of Western civilization will shift across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States, where even now decline is underway, and the trajectory of our Western traditions seeks a new location, presently unknown. Many people today focus their studies, or their children's studies, on the great books of the Western world. The great books are a collection of the greatest written works of Western civilization, beginning with the Iliad and ending with the works of certain early 20th century authors. These books also form a significant foundation for this podcast, although the episodes are not in any way limited to the scope of those books. But why do we walk this road? Why do we follow the map? Why go to meet with Aristotle, with Charlemagne, with Columbus? Why study history at all, and why study Western history with such attention? And why do so many people and their families immerse themselves in the richness of this heritage? Some may do this simply to maintain a connection between the past and the present, to retain a sort of communion with all those who have come before us. Others do this for more pragmatic reasons, perhaps. The vast sum of knowledge possessed in the West today has grown incrementally over the last several centuries. Learning through the great books allows one to acquire knowledge as the ancients did, standing on the shoulders of the great men who came before them. But this approach also allows us to learn from their mistakes, to understand how preconceptions can cloud your approach to problems. Finally, there is no doubt that the journey through the history of the West is exciting, especially when compared to the drab experiences most students have in the average school environment. At best, they learn history from sanitized snippets of the great books. Often, they do not hear of the great books at all. Instead, their teachers serve them pre-digested bits of information summarized in the dull paragraphs of a textbook. The Western Traditions podcast aims to provide the listener with a much more thorough exploration of these great books and the lives of the men and women who wrote them. But this will be more than a tour through a library. Here you will build a vision of the human past in your mind. As the podcast progresses, the complex tapestry of battles and truces, marriages and love affairs, speeches and prayers, births and deaths, they will all weave themselves into a coherent picture of events that will lead from the most distant past to our present day and to you yourself. You have inherited this history. There will be 12 separate series of episodes produced for this podcast. The first 8 series of podcasts will focus on a particular period of history and the culture associated with it. Those episodes will progress chronologically for the most part along a sort of historical spine that extends from the beginning of the world to our contemporary time. The first series is called The Ancient World. It describes events from the creation of the universe through biblical times in the Near East, up to the rise of the Persian Empire. The second series is called The Greek Sun. Here begins the truly distinct history of the West. Greek culture reaches an apex after defending itself from the Persian Empire. The third series is called The Roman Empire. It begins with the Roman origins in the mythological past and extends all the way to the decline of Roman culture and power in the 3rd century after Christ. The Middle Ages are the subject of the 4th series, which will begin with the rise of the Roman Emperor Constantine and continues until the fall of Constantinople in AD 1453. The 5th series is called The Early Modern Period, a segment of history that begins in the late 15th century with the discovery of the Americas and ends around the time of the 7 Years' War between France and England in the 18th century. The period from about 1750 until the year 1914 is sometimes called the Long 19th Century. This 6th series will explore the cultural, political, and technical unity of that era. The 7th series tells the story of the short 20th century, beginning with World War I, which radically changed the political and cultural landscape of the entire world, and ends with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Then, the 8th series will explore our contemporary world from the advent of the Internet and on through the beginning of the 21st century. 4 additional series of podcasts will provide insights into current events, the history of the Native Americans, analysis of the Bible, and the last series shows you how to apply these podcasts and the great books as curriculums for both children and adults. Until next time, then, I thank you for listening to the Western Traditions Podcast.